What's going on, everybody? This is Tarek with TNC Sportscast, and today we're going to be doing starts and sits for fantasy football week 2. I will tell you throughout this video, I'm going to be doing our top 10 rankings that are kind of pop up on the screen, and I'll talk about them a little bit throughout the video, so stay tuned for that. But it's going to be a little bit different of a video than last week. We did the individual video for each position last week, so I'm going to try to pack it all into one video. It's a lot more easier, and unfortunately, Cooper is not with us today. He had a lot of stuff going on, so we mutually kind of agreed we wanted to get this video out in time for you guys to set your lineups and for your matchups on Sunday. So with that being said, I'm going to be doing starts, sits, and risks. I'm going to be adding risks to this. So some guys you could start, could sit, just kind of a risky pick. It's up to you. And we're going to be doing like late third, fourth, fifth, sixth, below guys that were drafted in that range. Might have a couple of third rounders in here. But if you drafted somebody in the top 3 rounds in your draft, you might as well start them. We've only been through 1 week. It might not have panned out how you wanted week 1, but you drafted them for a reason, so you might as well start them. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's get started. All right, so the first guy we're going to talk about for a start is Jayden Daniels. He had 2 rushing touchdowns last week. Didn't have a passing touchdown, but doesn't matter. He had 28 fantasy points. His rushing upside is totally there. And that's even without him slinging the ball. He didn't really even throw that much last week. He had a lot of pressures and just kind of ran around and got some good points. With that being said, though, like I said, if he gets that ball passed around and gets the passing touchdowns, he could definitely outperform his performance of 28 points of last week. He has Brian Robinson Jr., Austin Eckler, could dump it down, screen passes, yards after catch. He's got Terry McLaurin. He's got Zach Ertz. He's got a couple other receivers that he can throw the ball to. But definitely, if he gets that ball slinging this week, he definitely can outperform his performance. And I feel like they're definitely going to try to have him throw the ball more. I think last week was kind of a trial run and had a lot of pressures and just ended up running the ball. But honestly, it works out. We had him as a start last week, kind of hesitant because he was a rookie, but it worked out and definitely a start for this week. All right, next up is a running back on our starts, Zach Charbonnet. Kenneth Walker is doubtful for this weekend on Sunday. Zach Charbonnet has proven that he can definitely take that RB1 role in Seattle. And I think it's going to be a very, very, very good matchup for Zach Charbonnet. They're going to dump it down to him. You saw how much they used Kenneth last week. Yes, that was probably because they played the Broncos. But I still think they could definitely get some good usage out of him, and I think he could still have a good amount of fantasy points. Kenneth Walker is definitely a top 15-10 running back in fantasy, and if they use him the same way, and Zach Charbonnet has proven that he can do it, and if they use him, definitely will be a start for this week. All right, continuing with our starts, we have Chris Godwin. He surprised everybody last week, had 22 fantasy points. And he's back in the slot where he belongs. He gets tons of receptions there. Has kind of a difficult matchup against the Lions this week, but I still think he's going to have a good amount of points. Definitely going to be a start. Yes, Mike Evans is going to get a lot of passes thrown to him. But like I said, with Godwin being in that slot role, he's going to get tons of touches. Definitely is a great yards after catch guy. And definitely has to be in your starting lineup for this week. All right, another guy you can definitely start this week is Najee Harris. He has a great matchup against the Broncos this week. Kenneth Walker ran all over them last week. I really think with probably Justin Fields playing, I think Russell Wilson's not going to play. I think they're going to lean on the run. Denver doesn't have a good run defense. They do have a good pass defense. So definitely Najee Harris could be getting those touches. I know Jaylen Warren sometimes eats into that. And I think he's not questionable anymore. I didn't double check. But I definitely think Najee Harris, Arthur Smith loves his goal line backs. If he gets a touchdown, Najee Harris could have a great week and definitely needs to be a start. All right, I know this guy is kind of a no-brainer. Definitely probably the #1 waiver wire pickup last week. Well, this week, but from last week's matchups. Jordan Mason, the 49ers running back. CMC is out. Jordan Mason is going to be seeing tons of touches. He did last week. I'm telling you right now, if he is in your waivers, go pick him up. Go pick him up. Go use a waiver wire pickup. Go pick him up. He's going to at least, he was projected like 18 earlier today. They dropped it down to 16, but he had an amazing game. They used him so much. I mean, he's playing the Vikings, I believe, and I mean, it's an okay defense, but definitely with how much the 49ers are going to use him, he's got to be in your starting lineup. All right, so here's one of those guys that I said is probably going to be in your 3rd round picks. I'm going to talk about Josh Jacobs. He is questionable. I do believe he is supposed to play like you know, the man behind me, Jordan Love, he is out. So Malik Willis, I don't think he'll be terrible. I don't know. I'm kind of scared. But I think they're really going to lean on Josh Jacobs this week. I think it's going to be a really good matchup against the Colts. Joe Mixon ran all over them last week. And especially if Malik is struggling, I think they're just going to hand the ball off. The Packers have a good offensive line. He really started to get going last week, about the second half against the Eagles, and the Eagles have a really good defense. So I really think if Malik's kind of struggling, then definitely have Josh Jacobs in there. He's going to be getting tons of touches. All right, so our must-start tight end this week is Kyle Pitts. I have him in a ton of leagues. I believed in him. He didn't disappoint last week. Yes, he had a touchdown that kind of saved his week. But this week kind of has a risky matchup against the Eagles. But I definitely think he can kind of slip through the back and get around those linebackers and get open. He is definitely Kirk Cousins. I really think he's Kirk Cousins' #1 red zone target, which is big. Those touchdowns, they can definitely save a week for you. The tight ends, the position is like Travis Kelce had 6 points. Mark Andrews had 3 points. Evan Ingram had 1 point. Those are like some of the top tight ends last week, and they didn't do anything. He ended up with 11 fantasy points, and I definitely think he can have another good week for you guys this week. Another guy, I've been huge on him, Brian Thomas, the Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver. Had a decent game last week. I think he had about 14 points last week. Did catch a touchdown, but I think definitely is going to have a good matchup this week. I think he's definitely Trevor Lawrence's like deep ball guy. He's going to throw it up there. He's going to go get it. And definitely if you have him in a flex position and you need somebody to fill it and you have Brian Thomas, I would throw him in there. I think he's definitely going to be a really solid receiver this whole year. Trevor seems to like him straight out of camp, and you can definitely tell last week in the game. All right, I know this guy's probably a no-brainer. I just want to put it out there. Rashee Rice, got to be in your starting lineups. Patrick Mahomes doesn't have Marquise Brown. They have Isaiah Pacheco. They have Rashee Rice. They have Xavier Worthy. They have Juju. Rashee Rice, slant master last week, still had a good amount of fantasy points. They play the Bengals this week. I feel like it's either going to be a shootout or it's going to be just the Chiefs are going to run away with it. But definitely have to have Rashee Rice in your starting lineups. He's definitely the #1 wide receiver in Kansas City, and I think all of his like allegations and everything are going to blow over. He's going to be fine. Keep him in your leagues and definitely have him in your starting lineup. Our last start for this week is Ramondre Stevenson. Surprised a lot of people last week. Probably the upset of the week was the Patriots beating the Bengals. Ramondre played a huge role, had a good amount of fantasy points, and I believe they play the Seahawks this week. So yes, kind of a tougher defense to play against, but I think they're definitely going to use Ramondre. Definitely have to rely on him. The receivers are okay. But Jacoby Brissett, definitely going to use him in the running game and definitely going to have, I think, another good fantasy performance. All right, so like I was saying at the beginning of the video, I'm going to go ahead and put my top 10 quarterback rankings up here on the screen next to me and go ahead and go over them for you guys and kind of just explain them. So first up, we have Lamar against the Raiders. I saw fantasy Lamar last week. He was running all over the place, ran for over 100 yards, slung the ball a little bit, had some poor accuracy here and there. But I think that'll get cleaned up, and I think he's going to have a great performance again this week. Next up, we have Josh Allen. This was done before last night's game. I know it's getting posted after, so Josh didn't really have a good game. But Josh Allen's going to be in the top 3 about every week for rankings. So next up, Anthony Richardson had a huge game last week. Was torching the Houston defense, slinging the ball. I threw it like 70 yards, I think, through the air on 1 pass attempt. And I think he's got good rushing upside, amazing rushing upside. Plays the Packers defense, who did hold Jalen Hurts to I think it was like 33 rushing yards last week. So definitely kind of some concerns on his rushing ability. But also I just think he's going to sling the ball. I think it's going to be a really good game for AR and definitely a good fantasy week. So next up, we talked about him just now, Jalen Hurts. Had kind of a mid-game last week, threw a couple interceptions. I still think he's definitely still a top 3 fantasy quarterback. He's playing the Falcons. Yes, they're kind of a good defense, but I did let Justin Fields win last week and drove. I know they didn't score, but still. I think Jalen will have a good bounce back game. I think they're going to air the ball out. A.J. Brown is questionable, so Devontae Smith could definitely be a good option. Dallas Goedert, maybe even Jahan Dotson. I know they traded for him, but I think Jalen Hurts will have a good game. So coming up at 5th, we have Mahomes against the Bengals. Like I said earlier in the video, it's either going to be a shootout or it's going to be a Chiefs win, and either one of those outcomes is perfect for Mahomes. I know he had an okay game last week against the Raiders, but the Bengals and the Chiefs always have good games, so I think it's going to be a great game for Mahomes. Next up, the Bears playing C.J. Stroud. Cooper would be telling me that I'm wrong, but yes, the Bears have a good defense, but C.J. Stroud is him. I'm sorry. I told him, I said in an earlier video, C.J. Stroud is going to be the MVP this week, or not this week, this year, and it's going to happen. I just got to say it. The Bears are going to get torched by C.J. Stroud. Next up, Jaden Daniels, talked about him earlier, must start. Playing the Giants, really good matchup. Not going to get too far in it with him because I explained it earlier in the video. But Kyler Murray in the Rams, I think a big bounce back game for Kyler Murray. Had like 16 points. Not a terrible performance, but definitely can do better. He has great rushing upside, like I said. Definitely needs to pass the ball out. Maybe give it to Marvin Harrison so he doesn't only have one catch this week. I know a lot of people drafted Marvin with their late first round, maybe early second round pick, so definitely want that to pan out. But like I said earlier, you drafted him for a reason. You got to start him. It'll pay off, okay? Next up, Baker Mayfield. Huge waiver wire pickup this week. If you picked him up, great pickup. Plays the Lions, kind of a tougher matchup. I talked about Chris Godwin earlier, but he was slinging the ball to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Trey Palmer. And I think the dump off to Rachaad White, huge yards after catch guy, definitely still helps Baker. I think Baker's going to have a great week. Lastly, Jared Goff against the Buccaneers. This game could be a shootout, honestly. Jared Goff didn't play a bad game last week. Hopefully he can get the ball over to like Amon-Ra, Laporta. Still involved Jameson. Jameson had a really, really good game. But those are the top 10 guys for me. You'll guess some will probably disagree, but for me, I think they have good matchups and shootout potential. So yeah, let's get to the sits. Starting off, we have George Pickens as a sit. He's playing Patrick Surtain this week. Patrick Surtain held DK Metcalf to not a lot of catches last week. I had him starting in multiple leagues. And I just think Justin Fields is the quarterback. He's not bad, but just not a good matchup for Pickens this week. Definitely a sit. All right, so this one hurts a little bit, but trust me, bench the Packers receivers. We don't know how good Malik Willis is going to be. Even if he is good, he doesn't even have a touchdown in his career, so that's scary. But definitely bench him. I know Jayden Reed had a really good week, but he also had Jordan Love throwing in the ball. Now, when Jordan Love comes back, yes, you're going to start them. Jordan Love, he is a dog. But definitely sit them for this week. Just trust me. I know Cooper would definitely complain and try to tell me I am wrong if he was here, but bench Caleb Williams. They're playing the Houston Texans, who have a very good defense. Caleb did not even score a touchdown last week. Yes, I know he's probably going to get good as the year goes on, but just trust me. Don't sit him. He's going against a good defense. Yes, he has the weapons, but first he has to show me that he can perform before I tell you guys to put him in your starting lineups. All right, another guy that I know Cooper would be telling me that you need to start, but he hasn't. I'm the type of guy that if they haven't shown me yet, I'm not starting them, okay? Drake London, I know people drafted him really high this year. He did not look good last week. He did not. And they're playing the Eagles, who have a very, very solid secondary. So I'm telling you, don't start Drake London. I told you to start Kyle Pitts. I think they'll definitely utilize Kyle Pitts. I don't think they will utilize Drake London this week, so don't start it. So this guy did lead his team in the carries last week. We didn't know who was going to lead between him and Chase Brown, but Zach Moss. Gotta bench Zach Moss this week. I know a lot of people either traded for him or picked him up, but he's playing the Chiefs defense. They held Derrick Henry to a very meh game, but just go ahead and sit him for this week. Don't take the risk. I know he had a good matchup and I think he had like 15 last week. But that was also against the Patriots defense, who did surprise, but yeah, definitely sit him this week, and maybe another week. Another guy in the split backfield that we didn't know how well he was going to do, and he did not do very good. Alexander Mattison took a lot of the touches, a lot of the receiving work. Bench Zamir White. maybe even cut him. I really don't think he's going to do that well. A lot of people have disagreed with me. That whole Raiders running back room is too crowded. I don't want anything to do with it. Bench Zamir White. Alexander Mattison, he might have a good game. If you want to go pick him up, go ahead. That's a risk, but yeah, bench Zamir White. Another quarterback you're going to want to sit for this week is Kirk Cousins. He didn't really prove anything last week. I know he's still coming off that injury, and you could definitely tell, but has a tough matchup against the Eagles. The Steelers' defense was good. The Eagles have a good defense. Like I said in a couple guys before, until they prove it, I really am very, very scared to start them. But if he slings the ball out, definitely go start him in it next week and all that. But I think maybe he'll get it down to Kyle Pitts a little bit, but I just don't think he's going to sling the ball a lot. I think they're really going to try to use Bijan against the Eagles. So definitely sit Kirk Cousins this week. All right, our last sit for this week is Calvin Ridley. One of the main reasons is, one, Will Levis did not throw the ball very well last week, and two, he has Sauce Gardner on him this week. So I'm telling you, do not start him. I know he is the number one wide receiver on that team, but he's probably going to have Sauce on him the whole game, and I don't want to have any part of that in my fantasy lineup. So it's now time to do our top 10 running back rankings for fantasy football week 2. I'm going to pop them up here again on the screen and gonna just go through them for you guys. So starting off, we have Saquon at number 1. I mean, he showed us last week why he should be at number 1. Literally balled out, showed why the Eagles went after him. He has a good offensive line now. He looks completely different than he did on the Giants, and he balled. I have to say it again. He balled out. So definitely he is the number 1 running back this week. Next up, we have Devon Achane against the Bills. I know that he already played when this video comes out, but I had him at 2. I think just the amount of receiving work he's getting this week here is crazy. I know there was a huge risk drafting him, but it's definitely going to pay off for the people that did it, and I drafted him in 2 leagues. I'm super happy with him. Next up, we have Breece Hall against the Titans. That's a pretty good matchup this week. They did kind of hold the Bears running backs to not a lot of yards last week, but it's Breece Hall. I mean, he's got to be in the top 3. And definitely the dump downs, the screens, he gets a lot of receiving work. That also helps. Next up, we have Bijan. Has kind of a tough matchup against the Eagles this week, but I still think they're going to utilize him. They're going to rely on him. They're going to use him. So definitely got to be up there in the rankings. Next up, we have Jordan Mason. Now, would be CMC, probably would be a little bit higher too if it was CMC, but Jordan Mason against the Vikings, they used him so much last week. He had tons of carries, had a great game, and I think they're going to do the exact same thing. Once they dump it down to him and run the ball with him, then they'll go over the top with Kittle, Debo, Ayuk, but Jordan Mason, he's going to have a great game. Next up, Jonathan Taylor against the Packers. Packers defense did struggle against Saquon Barkley last week. Jonathan Taylor is a dog. I feel like he is going to have a very good game against this Green Bay rushing defense. Then Kyren Williams against the Cardinals. Kyren, a lot of worry last week because he was returning punts. Still had a pretty solid game. And I've looked in the history of him playing the Cardinals last year, and he absolutely balled. So I feel like he's definitely going to have another good performance this week. And then Jahmyr Gibbs has kind of a tough Buccaneers defense, surprised a couple of people. But I mean, it's Jahmyr Gibbs. You got to start him. He's got to be up there in the rankings. Him and Montgomery did split a lot of the carries, but they still both had like 15, 16, 17 points each. So definitely have to start him. And then another guy, Pacheco. We said that backfield is going to be his. Oh my gosh. P. Ryan came in a little bit towards the end of the game, but that was Isaiah Pacheco's backfield, and he looked absolutely amazing. Catching the ball, running the ball, he was doing all of it, and he's getting huge upside with that receiving game now. Jerick McKinnon ate into that last year, but that is his now, and you can definitely tell he's going to have a great year in fantasy football. And then lastly, James Cook against the Dolphins. Like I said, this video is coming out after the fact, but a lot of people are underrating James Cook. They used him a ton last year in the last 4 games, and with the new offensive coordinator, and he balled. And definitely has to be in the top 10. I think he's in the top 10 most weeks. Honestly, he's over Henry for me, and they're going to utilize him a lot with him losing a couple of receivers. So now getting into our risky section, I kind of just added this in because there's a couple guys that I couldn't really pick. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to add a new section. I'm starting off Marvin Harrison. You're going to start him. I mean, a lot of people draft him in the second round. Like I said in the beginning of the video, you draft him early, you got to start him. They're going to get the ball. It's only week 2 this week. It was only week 1 last week. I know he had 1 catch, but you got to start him. It's just risky because of last week. And yeah, you got to start him. I think he's going to have a better game, but it's still, like I said, it's just a risky pick. Next up, another guy that had kind of a bad game last week is Chris Olave. Derek Carr didn't really get him the ball. They used Rashid Shaheed a lot, but just a risky pick alone. Olave, quarterback play is kind of mid, and if they don't get him the ball, he doesn't have good weeks. So that's why I'm putting him under the risky. A lot of people are probably still going to start him, but just if he doesn't get the ball, he's not going to have a good week. Another guy that's kind of in that 2nd to 3rd round range of being drafted is Davante Adams. Didn't really have a good week last week. It wasn't terrible, but Gardner really didn't use him, didn't target him. And that's kind of scary because people were taking him in the 2nd and 3rd rounds, and if you're going to start him, you want him to do good. But he just wasn't getting targeted, and it's kind of scary. I mean, you're going to start him. He's Davante Adams. He's a top 3 receiver in the league, but it's just scary, and it's a risky start. So another risky receiver, I know I have a lot of receivers in the risky picks, but Jameson Williams had a huge game last week, a lot of opportunities, but I talked about it when I talked about Jared Goff. I really think he's going to try to spread the ball out more. You got Laporta, you got Amon-Ra, Jameson. Yes, he's probably still going to get some targets, but I don't feel like it's going to be as big as it was last year. Definitely could start him, but just risky because of the amount of talent they have in that receiving core. And then a risky quarterback does have some upside with the rushing ability, but Justin Fields didn't throw a touchdown pass last week. Had, I think, about 11 points. But if he uses his rushing ability and they let him, I think he could have a good game and could be a top quarterback. He was, I think, 2 years ago when he was on the Bears, he used his legs and got 30 points a game. But if they don't let him do that, his arm's not the best. I mean, he's not the most accurate quarterback, so that's what kind of scares me here. But definitely, if he starts running the ball like he used to, you got to start him. Another risky receiver, I know they're mostly receivers in the risky, but it's just that's the main position that it's risky at. Tank Dell, the receiving room is kind of crowded, but he definitely has good chemistry with CJ Stroud. I think it's just a matter of time before he does get his pop-off game. Didn't have a huge game last week. Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs did. But I think Jalen Johnson's going to be on one of them, and Tariq Stevenson. I think Tank Dell might get some opportunities this week, but it's just kind of a risk with how crowded that wide receiver room is. So our last kind of risky pick is Jerome Ford. Had a decent game last week against Dallas, but it came on a late touchdown that kind of saved his week. Ended up with like 18, I believe. But he's playing Jacksonville, who don't have a bad rushing defense. And I would start him only because Deshaun did not look good, and they're probably going to rely on the run a lot. But it's just risky with Jacksonville having a decent run defense. But it's totally up to you. I'm probably going to start him in my leagues, but just kind of a risky pick. All right, and that was our starts, sits, and risk picks for week 2 of fantasy football. To wrap up the video, I'm going to go ahead and put our wide receiver and tight end rankings up here next to me on the screen and just kind of go over them quick. So starting off, we have CeeDee Lamb against the Saints as our #1 wide receiver. I think he's going to build that chemistry back with Dak. They had a little bit of time that they didn't really practice because CeeDee was working out the contract. I think they're going to get that handled, and CeeDee's going to be the top receiver again. Then we have Cooper Kupp. He balled last week against the Lions. And had a great fantasy week, 33 fantasy points. I told everybody to go draft him. I probably drafted him a little early. I drafted him in the 3rd, but it was totally worth it. He was projected 18 on Sleeper, and I think he's going to have a great week. Then we have Tyreek Hill against the Bills. Like I said before in the video, this is going to come out after the game. But I think he'll have a decent matchup. The Bills' defense is pretty decent, but I don't know for sure. It just kind of depends on if Tua can get him and Waddle the ball. So, yeah. Next up, Amon-Ra had a very quiet week last week. I think he had 2 catches. But like I said with Jared Goff, I think they're going to spread the ball out and definitely could be a shootout. So definitely want to have him up in the rankings just because of his upside. He's always been a safe pick. Then we have Justin Jefferson. Sam Darnold definitely can throw the ball. Targeted Jefferson a lot, and Jefferson came down with it. Does have kind of a hard matchup against the 49ers. but I think he's still going to have a great week. Sam Darnold played 10 times better than I thought he was going to. And then Mike Evans against the Lions. Him and Chris Godwin are going to be kind of eating at each other's targets. But I think Mike Evans is still going to have a great week. He's always just Mr. Reliable in fantasy football. And then we have A.J. Brown. He is questionable right now. So if he does go out, Devontae Smith is probably a really good option, kind of that safe target that Jalen Hurts can throw the ball to. But if Brown plays, he's always a game changer. Had a really good week last week against Green Bay. Had over 100 receiving yards. Had like a 60-yard touchdown on Jair, sadly. But definitely could have a good week. And then Ja'Marr Chase. Ja'Marr Chase is going to get higher, I feel like, as the season goes on. But they just did not play good last week, and it just scares me. Joe Burrow did not look like the same. And that we'll see if that hand injury kind of affects that. But Jamar's going to be down in the rankings a little bit until they prove themselves. And then Garrett Wilson against the Titans. They do have L'Jarius Sneed, which he'll probably be lined up on Garrett Wilson. But Rogers Deli was targeting Garrett Wilson against the 49ers, and you could tell. And I think that connection is going to grow as the season goes on, and he's definitely going to be a top receiver. And then lastly, Rashee Rice had him in this must starts. Definitely the wide receiver 1 in Kansas City. A lot of people were scared drafting him because of all the allegations and everything, and all of the stuff that happened in the offseason. But that is, I think, going to kind of just boil over, and he's going to be just fine. And you got him at a discount price, honestly, if you draft him in like the 5th, 6th round. So he is definitely a must start. I think it's either going to be a shootout, like I said, or it's going to be a Chiefs win. And either way, that's good for Patrick Mahomes and Rashee Rice. And then moving on, I'm going to put the tight ends up here. Have Travis Kelce at 1. I know he didn't have the best game last week, but he's Mahomes' safe target, and nobody's going to be able to break up that connection. So definitely have Kelce at 1. Then Trey McBride at 2. Plays a tough matchup against the Rams. They have a decent defense, but he's definitely one of Kyler's favorite options. And if he can't get the ball to his receivers, he's going to just dump it off to Trey McBride. And then Sam Laporta also had kind of a quiet week. Huge quiet week last week for the tight ends. But I think it's going to be a bounce-back week. Sam Laporta, I think he's going to get more targets this week. And I think it's just going to be just overall a better fantasy performance from him. And then this is hard. I say likely. Him and Mark Andrews is just hard because we don't know who's going to get more targets. It could be either one of them, but he absolutely balled, so I had to put him high on this list. I think him and Jordan Mason were the top waiver wire pickups this week, but you got to go start him. He's playing the slot mostly, so that's huge. He gets the receiving work, and definitely. And then Kyle Pitts, talked about him earlier. Like I said, had a hard matchup against the Eagles this week, and so that's kind of the risk, but he's still going to be a top tight end. And then Dalton Kincaid plays the Dolphins. I think he'll be good. He didn't really do much last week, but I think Josh Allen has to give him the ball. He's one of his only go-to receivers. I mean, Shakir's good and James Cook is good, but he's got to get it to the tight end. So Dalton Kincaid is definitely going to have a good week, I think. And then George Kittle didn't have a bad game last week. But it's so crowded in the receiving room there. You got Debo, you got Ayuk, you got Kittle, Juwan Jennings, Jordan Mason they can dump it off to. So it's a good tight end pick, but it's just risky because of the amount of people in the room. And then Evan Ingram, horrible. I think he had 1 catch, 1 point last week. But I think he's going to have a bounce-back week. Trevor and him had a great connection last year, and I think we're going to see it again. And then Brock Bowers proved me wrong. I had him as a sit last week, and he definitely showed that they're going to utilize him. Gardner targeted him a lot, so definitely start him. He's playing the Ravens, so a harder defense, but definitely go ahead and start him. And then lastly, we have Parkinson, the Rams tight end with Puka Nacua out. They're playing the Cardinals. Could be a good matchup against kind of a mid defense, but Matthew Stafford's going to have to find another good target to seek if Cooper Kupp gets locked up. So Parkinson could definitely be a go-to tight end. But that was our starts, sits, and risks, and then our weekly rankings for each position. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.